Hey guys, welcome back to the piece Hat KAL. We are in the final week where we're going to be finishing the top of the hat and adding the duplicate stitch color work onto it, and then also making the pom-pom. So I've pulled my pattern back out here. We're going to be on page 2 still here, where you should have just completed this step where it says knit around until work measures 12 inches. Now we're going to be knitting the next 2 rounds, knit 2 together around. So I've got my project here, and as you can see, I've done 8 inches of just plain stockinette after the 4 inches of the ribbed cuff. So that's 12 inches total. And now we're ready to knit 2 together all the way around. This is not a shaped cuff, a shaped crown. So sometimes in a pattern, you'll have a series of decrease rows, which will allow the top of the hat to sort of come up to a point, and that will be shaped all the way around. This is a much easier process where we're just gonna cinch the top. We're gonna string the end of the tail all the way around each of the stitches and pull it like a drawstring, which just pulls all of the top together like this. And I just like to do a couple of decrease rounds at the very top to reduce the number of stitches that you're trying to pull together, because if there's too many, then you're gonna have a little hole at the top there because all the stitches can't fit into one tiny little space. So again, we're gonna work 2 rounds of knit 2 together. So you're just gonna slip your stitch marker over to begin this first decrease round. If you're unfamiliar with the knit 2 together decrease, it's super simple and it's basically exactly what it sounds like. You're just going to knit these first 2 stitches together as if they were one stitch. So you insert your right needle up into both of those stitches at the same time, and you just knit them together as if it's one stitch. And we're gonna do that all the way around. So you're gonna then do it to the next 2 stitches here, then the next 2, and then looks like I've threaded this a little bit there. It's kind of separated. Okay, so sorry, I'm gonna put those back on. Now we're gonna knit these 2 together, then these 2, then these 2. And I do have a tutorial specifically for the knit 2 together decrease and the slip slip knit, which is kind of the same thing, but opposite. It leans a different way. I've got a tutorial for both of those up on my site if you're interested in rewatching this portion, so that if you're a total beginner and you might need a little bit more in-depth instruction, feel free to check out those tutorials. I am going to continue knitting 2 together all the way around, and I will meet you guys back around when I reach the stitch marker for the second round of decreases. Okay, I am back to the beginning of the next round. I'm just gonna knit these 2 last stitches together, and I'm gonna slip this stitch marker over, and we're basically gonna do the exact same thing all the way around again. This might get a little tricky because these stitches are gonna be really stretched around the needles. I was trying to avoid you guys having to use double pointed needles for any portion of this hat, but if you feel more comfortable slipping this work onto double pointed needles so it's a little bit easier to get these stitches to go around, that's totally fine. I'm gonna just go ahead and stretch these as much as I can. So we're gonna knit 2 together, knit 2 together, oops. Like I said, I think in one of the earlier videos, these needles are super sharp, and so they really tend to split this yarn. So I hope you haven't been having that same problem. So after we finish this round, we should end up with 20 stitches because we started with 80, and then the first decrease round brought us down to 40, and then this is gonna bring us down to just 20 stitches. Okay, just a couple more here. 1 and 2. Okay, great. So now we have finished all of our decrease rounds, and you can see this is pulling these stitches all together already a little bit because each of these are going to be brought together. So we're literally just cinching the top. And this part is pretty fun. We're going to go ahead and cut our tail. I still like to leave quite a bit of length there, a couple feet maybe. And we're going to slip, we're going to add our tapestry needle here. So just go ahead and thread that. And in the same direction that you were just knitting your stitches, we are going to slip all of our stitches onto this thread using the tapestry needle. So I'm going to just kind of move all of these over to this one needle here. Make it easy peasy. So you're just going to literally, you can do it one at a time. You can kind of insert this needle into several of them at the same time, as long as you're transferring them over. Okay, now we can lose the needles. No more needles, yay! Now we're going to be working exclusively with the tapestry needle. So you're literally just going to pull all of those together like it's a drawstring. And then what I like to do is insert my needle down that center hole and pull it to the interior of the hat and turn everything inside out. Oops. And pull it really tightly that way. And then I usually go through some of those stitches again, just to strengthen this top bit, especially if you're working with a delicate yarn and it tends to break. You don't want to pull too tightly or it could just break your yarn, which would be devastating at this point. So I'm just gonna pull that real tight, get rid of some of this fuzz, and then I'm gonna secure this with a knot. Sometimes I do a few, just to make sure it's extra stable. Okay. And then we're going to weave in our ends. So there are several different ways of weaving in ends. There's no real super proper way. What I usually do is basically use a duplicate stitch, which is kind of what we're going to be doing for our color work as well. And all that means is kind of retracing your steps of the stitches that you've worked. So I just kind of zigzag this guy around. I think the most important thing I've found when weaving in ends is that you really want to go maybe an inch or two in one direction. So I'm going this way and then go back the other direction. What that does is if the hat stretches this way, it might loosen up your tail that's been going in that direction. But if you've got it going in the other direction too, that's gonna stabilize it. So it probably won't come out and poke out the front of the work. Some people like to weave in their ends from the front of the work so that they can see if it's showing or not. And I do that sometimes too, but this is at the very top of the hat where we're gonna have the pom-pom, and so that will probably cover a lot of it, plus it's gonna be gathered a little bit at the top, so you're not really gonna see too much of the very top of the hat. So as you can see, I'm just going back the other direction a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and trim that guy. And now for the bottom tail, this one I think is pretty easy to weave in because you can just follow the ribs, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So first, you'll notice that there's this tiny little gap in between where we started and ended our cast on in the first round. So usually I'll go back through the very beginning here and kind of do a figure 8 to bring that back together so it looks a little bit more seamless. And then this one, I might actually, I'm just zigzagging again a little bit, I might actually work this one from the front. The reason being is that when we, oops, and I lost my needle. When we fold this up, this is gonna be the front of the work. So I'm gonna actually look at this side of the fabric while I'm weaving in this end. And so what I like to do with the tail end at the bottom is find a row of knit stitches, which are the V's, begin at the bottom, and I just sort of barber pull the needle up one side of V's, maybe about 1.5 inches. And then I follow that last stitch goes around this away and underneath the V above it. And then I turn it around and I barber pole down the opposite direction. And I usually don't go all the way down just in case the end sticks out the bottom, like this. And then I usually wiggle it around a little bit so that it's kind of in place with the rest of the stitches. And it's essentially invisible. So then I trim that real close. And now we've got the body of our hat finished and we're ready to do our color work. And I mean, the hat is great just like this too. If you're super intimidated about doing the little hands and you just want to go ahead and leave this a blue hat, you're welcome to do that too. Because this pattern is so simple, you could work this in any different color with or without color work. It's a really nice pattern for just a basic beanie with a ribbed folded cuff. So you can play around with this with Fair Isle knitting or all sorts of stuff to add different textures with simple stitch repeats and stuff. So I hope you guys have fun with this pattern down the line too and try and create some new stuff. So okay, now we're ready to, let's just take a peek at the pattern again. So we've just woven in all of our loose ends and now we are ready for the peace sign color work. So for this part, we'll need our 3 different skin tone colors. Again, these are Vanna's Choice. I worked the body of the hat in Woolies and then these are Vanna's Choice. The Vanna's collection just has a really nice selection of colors. And I thought that these 3 really kind of represented a variety of different skin tones, which is why I chose them. So we're gonna need not too much of each of these. I think it's like 15 yards. I'll just reference the pattern here of each one. Yep, we just need about 15 yards of each color. So you're gonna start with whatever one you want to be the middle hand, just to get a reference of kind of how it's all gonna fit on the hat. I chose the lightest skin tone or the lightest yarn color for the middle just because that was the first one I had on hand and then I had to go out and buy the other 2. But feel free to put them in any order you like. So I'm gonna begin with this one again just so that it matches the original one that I have in the photos. And let me just find my end here. I know I just saw it poking out somewhere. There we are. Okay. So what you want to do is follow the chart that is on the following page. So again, if you guys didn't print this out, if you don't have a printer or something, I would really recommend drawing this out, whether it's on graph paper or you kind of make your own little graph, because it makes it really easy when you can see it kind of in your face exactly as you're doing it here. It's a little bit harder to read from a computer screen. So I would definitely suggest printing that if you can, or drawing it out. So if we read the instructions, it says here, starting approximately 2 inches above the ribbing, use duplicate stitch with the tapestry needle and the chart on the following page to create a peace sign hand in one of the contrast colors. So I'm gonna keep this chart handy. And what I like to do is I got these really cute little bamboo stitch marker guys. Not really a stitch marker. They're just called marking pins actually. And you can use these, you can use bobby pins, you can use regular straight pins, you can use anything you like, but what I like to do is kind of mark where the chart begins and ends, both on the left and right side and the top and the bottom onto the body of the hat, so I can kind of count like how many stitches I'm going over and up, and I can make sure that I'm doing it within this same area. So I guess I'll only need 4 of those for now. And I try to keep, even though where we began the hat, we wove in the ends and everything, it is pretty invisible, but I still like to keep that in the back of the hat just so the front of it where we're gonna do the color work is really, really nice and pristine. So I'm going to, this is the back of the hat, so I'm gonna work everything kind of directly on the other side. So we've got the front of the hat here. And so, as I said in the instructions, the first hand starts about 2 inches above the ribbing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and measure that. So maybe about right here. I'm just going to slip one of these little marking pins underneath a stitch right there. So this is about 2 inches above the ribbing. And as you can see here, we've got 20 stitches, 20 rows up that we're gonna be utilizing for our color work. So I'm gonna count this as stitch 1, and I'm gonna count up 20 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And I'm gonna put another marker right there. So now I know this is the height of my chart. And we've got 12 rows, 12 stitches across. So I'm gonna maybe count this as like the 6th stitch, which would give me 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I know that in between these 2 rows, because this is the first one, that's where we're gonna begin. So I'm gonna stick this marker up in between, just to the right of that first row where we're gonna begin our chart. And with the final pin, I'm gonna mark after the 12th stitch. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So again, right after that guy, I'm gonna mark that row. So this is our nice little box that's the same size as our chart here. Now we can go ahead and begin our duplicate stitch for that first hand. So I'm gonna thread. You don't want the length of this to be too crazy long because it just gets really frustrating to work with and sometimes it tangles. And as with any embroidery, the back of it doesn't really matter because it's gonna be on the interior of the hat. So you can have as many little tail ends that you can just easily tie off on the inside of the hat. So don't worry about needing enough of a length to finish the whole hand. You can always add another extra length at the end if you run out. Now we can begin the duplicate stitch for our first little hand here. So I've got a length of the first contrast color on my tapestry needle, and we are going to follow along the chart to help us determine where we're going to begin our duplicate stitch. I like to start in the bottom right corner, but feel free to start from any point in here. It doesn't really matter where you begin or the direction that you're going. It's just that I like to start from here because that is how knitting charts are generally read, so I'm just used to that. So our chart begins for the way that I'm doing it in the bottom right corner, and we've got 2 stitches here that we're going to work from that bottom right corner. So first I'm going to find the bottom right corner, which is going to be this row where it meets this stitch. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So this are the stitches going over, and this is the first stitch of the bottom right quadrant of our chart here. So we need to skip 2 of those. So we're actually going to be working into this stitch right here. So I'm just going to actually pull that up a little bit so that it's easy for me to locate, because we're going to be working from the underside of the hat first. So I'm going to take my tapestry needle with the contrast color and go up from the inner part of the hat up into where that stitch begins. And I will probably leave like a 4 to 6 inch tail on the interior of the hat because I'm going to tie this off at the end, not right now, but I just want to leave a little bit of a length so it's easier to do that. So again, we have gone over to the second from the bottom right corner. As you can see, these knit stitches are little V's, and we want to make sure we're working into the V's and not in between 2 rows, which are these little kind of temple-like shapes, like an upside down V. So we are essentially just retracing the path of the yarn that created our body of our hat. So if you look closely, you can see that this first stitch, and you can literally use your needle like a pencil to trace it, it goes up here, and then it goes underneath the stitch of the row above it. So I'm just going to allow this to go in the same direction. And then the yarn goes back into that same bottom of the stitch, into the bottom of the V where we began. I like to work duplicate stitch with my left hand up into the interior of the hat. Otherwise, there's a chance that if you're just working it flat like this, you could accidentally pick up a little bit of the yarn from the back of the hat and then it would be stuck together. So to prevent that from happening, I'm going to put my left hand up in here and I'm going to go complete this first duplicate stitch, which again just goes back into the bottom of the V where we began. And the next stitch over is also in the contrast color. So I'm going to insert my needle up under that next stitch right adjacent to this one where we began. I think Pearl Soho has an excellent tutorial on their site for weaving in ends, and it can also be used basically exactly like how we're doing the duplicate stitch right now, because they use a contrast color. I think they're using a red yarn against a white stockinette fabric, so that might be something really good. I'll drop the link into the blog post for this right underneath this little video, because that might really be helpful for you guys to see step-by-step photos. I don't know how clear mine will be with my shaky hands and all, so I would highly recommend that. So we're gonna go ahead and work this stitch as well. So again, the yarn goes up and underneath the stitch from the row above it, and then we're going back down into that same V, and I can remove this marking pin now because I know what row I'm on. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches in this contrast color in this row. So I've already worked 2. I'm gonna come up underneath the third. And you can see that these are just creating really cute little V's that are just exactly like the body of the hat, but in a contrast color. So if you're really intimidated by working like Fair Isle or Intarsia, this is a great way to add color work after you've already finished your project. So you can even do this on the pocket of an existing sweater, on any knit hats you already have. Some people put duplicate stitch on the elbows of some of their sweaters to create cute little patterns. It's a really fun way to add stuff and kind of freshen up an old thing that you may have lying in your closet that you haven't worn in a while, just to give it a new personality. So this is basically the same process. Let's see, what did I say? 6 stitches. Yep, and also ignore these little finger marks. That's going to be an embroidery stitch that we do at the end after we've finished the whole hand. So I have 4 here. Try not to pull this too tightly, because you kind of want it to sit up from the base of the fabric so that it doesn't pull too much, and you can then see the bottom of the fabric coming up through. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is going to be my final duplicate stitch in this row. Oops. And one thing I will note, these yarns work really, really well together for this project, because the woolies, even though these are both worsted weight number 4 category 4 yarns, the Vanna's Choice is just ever so slightly thicker than the woolies, so it really allows this color to show on top of the base of the fabric, whereas if you were using another woolies as your duplicate stitch yarn, or if you made the base of the hat in Vanna's Choice as well, you might be able to see more of the fabric base coming up in between these stitches. But just because this is a tiny bit thicker, it's really taking up a lot of space and creating a really nice contrast here. So I'm going to pull this final one through to the interior of the hat to complete that first row of color work. Then you'll see that in the second row, we're starting 1 stitch to the left of where we stopped in this first row. So instead of bringing my needle up where I would have, if I would have kept going in this row, I would have brought it up here. But since we're moving up a row and over a stitch, I'm going to bring the needle up right here. And the bottom of the V of the stitch, 1 row up and 1 row left. And now I'm going to work back in this direction. So I'm going to do the same thing though, where the yarn traces the stitch this way. And you can do it the opposite if you like. I don't think it really matters as long as you're retracing everything, but I just like to go the stitches in that same counterclockwise motion. But then when I insert the needle back into that V, I'm gonna bring it up 1 stitch to the right, if I can find it. There we go. Uh-oh. He flew out, but we don't need him anymore either, because we know that this is the 3rd stitch in the little graph, 3rd stitch over. So, and in this case, we're gonna go, you can count them or you can just eyeball it, because you know you're gonna be going 1 stitch to the right of where this first row was. So I'm just gonna keep doing my little duplicate stitch retracing and moving to the right, 1 stitch over each time until I've completed all what I believe to be 8 duplicate stitches in this row. Give myself a little more slack here. Got one more. You see, if this were super long, this would get all twisty and tangled so easily. Trust me, I've made that mistake. Don't do it to yourself. Okay, so again, I kind of like to pull the needle through to the back of the hat each time I complete a row so I can really see it nice and clean on the body on the front here without this interrupting. So we've now completed 2 rows. I'm gonna go ahead and finish up this chart. What I'll probably do is go back and forth until I get to this point, and then I'll work one finger, and then I'll break the yarn and restart just like we restarted, just like how we started in this first stitch here. I'll do that up here again. So I might have a few tails, like I said, on the back of the work, and at the very end we're just going to tie that off and trim it a little bit. So if you run out of yarn, again, feel free to just do that restart anywhere you like. As long as you're going over each of these stitches, it doesn't really matter which order you go in. You could start this guy on the way down and this one coming down too to meet wherever you are here. Have fun with it, and I will see you guys back once I've finished my first little piece hand. And we're back, and as you can see, I finished my first little piece hand, and I'm just going to show you guys just quickly on the underside here just how I sort of tied off each little end. I just tied a double knot and then trimmed it pretty close. The likelihood of this coming undone is pretty low, so I don't think you need to leave big long tails and weave them in. I've always done it like this and it's been just fine. So when you're ready to begin the second hand, you can follow what I did in the pattern, which is to kind of stagger them a little bit. I kind of wanted them to feel like they were all in a little bit of an arc, but you can put them right next to each other. You can put them anywhere else on the hat. But you're basically going to use the same technique so it says in the pattern here, oops, I need page 2. Repeat in the other 2 contrast colors approximately 3 inches above the ribbing and ½ inch to the right and left of the middle hand. So I basically just moved the next one up slightly and over slightly. So you can use your little marking pins or bobby pins or whatever you like to mark out that next quadrant and begin the same process again. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and do the little embroidery stitch with the blue base color, main color, over for the fingers so that you guys can see how that's done. So we're going to use this chart too. I kind of just drew on here to show you, you know, how I did the fingers. Again, it was really freehand, so just go ahead and start and kind of play around with it until you feel like it represents fingers. I originally just wanted to do it in one color, but I was like, okay, that looks a little too much like the Playboy Bunny logo, so we're gonna have to add in a little bit of blue to separate those fingers. So I'm just gonna thread a length of the main color, blue, back onto the tapestry needle, and we're gonna use what I call a back stitch in embroidery. I kind of started the first finger maybe above the second stitch in the farthest left, so that's where I'm going to insert my needle, right about here. Again, leaving a little bit of a tail on the interior of the hat. And we're going to, the first stitch is pretty simple. You're basically just going to go back in the fabric, and that's going to create a little blue line right over those, right over the contrast color. And then you're going to bring your needle up into where you want the next stitch to be, which is a little bit diagonal. So moving in this same line. The reason it's called a back stitch is because instead of doing this same motion again where we go down over here into the following stitch, we're actually going to go back and insert the needle into where the first stitch went back into the fabric. And then we're going to bring the needle back up again over here where it comes up for the beginning of the third stitch. So what that does is creates a solid line rather than a dotted line. And let's see, if this finger is coming kind of down here, maybe I'll start to move this over, so I might put the next one over here after I've inserted back into this. I think I'm gonna come up maybe like right there. Occasionally I have to kind of take this out if it looks a little too wonky. But again, just play around with it and it will all come together eventually. So this finger, 1, 2, 3, I started that 1, 2, 3. So I'm gonna go maybe one more over here in this line. It's a little bit difficult to do on this table rather than in my lap, so I apologize if it looks awkward. Okay, and then now we're gonna start to form the bottom part, the tip of the finger. So I'm gonna come maybe right there. This is not an exact science. It is starting to look like a thumb, so we're good. Yay. Great. So there is the embroidery work for the thumb, and then I'm going to do the same process up here for the other two fingers. This one started in the corner here, and you could have started with this finger or the pinky, whatever you prefer. There's no right way. Again, going back into the end of the first stitch, and this one kind of goes just alongside of the tip of the thumb. Get in there, okay? So the trajectory I want is kind of up into here. And the last finger just dips down a little bit. Okay. Kind of fudge the stitches around a little bit. There is one hand, and now you can go ahead and work the other two hands if you prefer, but I'm going to show you guys how to do the pom-pom next, just in the interest of time. So what you'll need for that is either a pom-pom maker or just your hands. Okay, now we are ready to create the pom-pom on the top of the hat, and I wanted the pom-pom to kind of represent all of these different colors coming together in unity, so I used all 4 strands held together with my pom-pom maker to create this pom-pom. So first I'm going to show you how to do it the way I did, and then I'll show you how to do it just using your hands if you don't have one of these pom-pom makers. So the instructions for the pom-pom are on page 3 right below the chart. So it says, if using pom-pom maker, create pom-pom to desired fullness using all 4 colors together. We're gonna do that process first. So you'll take your pom-pom maker. Again, this is by Clover. I'm pretty sure this is the medium size pom-pom. Oh, look at that, a square chip reader stuck in there. What you do first is you lift up 2 of the sides here, holding these together. You're just gonna start wrapping around and around and around and around and around this half moon shape until it is pretty full. I like to kind of fill in this little center arc. The more yarn you use and the more times you wrap, the fuller the pom-pom will be. Just gonna pull out some extra yarn here. So you're just gonna wrap, 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 wrap. Going back and forth around here. Okay, that looks good. Then we're gonna cut those off. Replace this. Then lift up these 2 sides and do the same thing on this half moon side of the pom-pom maker. Wrap, 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 wrap. Try to keep those ends in order. Great. Gonna trim those off too. Close this one down. And you need to, using very sharp scissors, which these of course are not, you wanna cut in between the grooves that were part of the pom-pom maker. So you're going to start cutting these guys. Again, helps if you've got real sharp scissors. As you can see, there's this little groove in the pom-pom maker that helps guide the scissors, so it makes it pretty easy to cut evenly. And then you're gonna do that to the other side as well. Once you've got all of those cut, you're gonna take a length of yarn. I'm gonna use blue just because it's handy and that's what the body of the hat is. And you're going to take this yarn and slip it all the way around the interior of that pom-pom. I like to tie a double knot here. And then go back the other direction a couple of times. Just to really make it secure. Again, if you're using a delicate yarn, you want to make sure you do this carefully so it doesn't break in half. Tie another double knot. Oops. And then we're going to release the pom-pom maker. It separates like this. And you've got your pom-pom. Now, there always needs to be a little bit of shaping that's done. Some of these little tails might fly out. So, when you're using a pom-pom maker, it does make it pretty round, so there shouldn't be too much you need to trim, but it's kind of like cutting a hedge into a topiary or something. You're just gonna trim off all these guys. You could literally do this all day long. If you're a perfectionist, you're gonna have a field day with this. might take you a little longer because you will always see one little guy sticking out more than the others. So you're going to just continue trimming this all the way around. Be really careful not to trim off those tails because that is what we're going to use to attach the pom-pom to the top of the hat. So again, in the interest of time, I will just give this a quick little haircut. But I'm not going to trim it too perfectly because I want to show you guys how to attach it and then also how to make the pom-pom without the maker. So get your hat back, and you can use a tapestry needle to, what I like to do actually is separate these, little knot there, I'm going to trim off. What I like to do is one at a time, string your ends onto a tapestry needle, and you're going to insert this into, see our little top of the hat that we cinched together? I like put one end down one side of the center hole there, and then I put the other end on the tapestry needle, and I insert this one just on the other side of that center pole, so that if you can see these coming out, they're kind of next to each other but not in the exact same place, and that keeps the pom-pom really centered at the top of the hat so it's not off to one side. And we're going to turn this inside out, take those two ends, tie a bunch of knots. I usually don't weave these ends in, I usually just kind of leave them hanging and maybe leave like an inch of a tail on each side. Again, I've never had a problem with a pom-pom falling off the top of the hat, so hopefully you won't either, but I just really do that. And then the pom-pom is on the top of the hat. So if you want to do it without the pom-pom holder, you are going to, instead of cutting the length of yarn that was the tail that attached to the hat at the end, you're going to do that first. So I like to cut a decent length of yarn, and I drape that in between the middle finger and the ring finger of my left hand. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab all four colors again, if they will behave, and you're going to, with these kind of kept out of the way, turn your hand sideways and just start wrapping these around and around and around. If you want it to be the size of the pom-pom we just made, actually you don't want to do this too tight. I just kind of strangled my fingers, so I'm going to loosen that up slightly. Keep those again out of the way. And you're going to wrap until it's your desired fullness. I know it's kind of tough to tell, but you want a nice fat bundle here. Start to kind of slip off. Okay, that looks good. Gonna trim those ends. Then you're gonna take the two ends, the end that you draped in between your two fingers here, and kind of holding those together. I like to tie a little loose knot here if you can. It's a little tricky one-handed. And you're going to really carefully slip this off and tie this so it looks like a bow tie. So I'm gonna really carefully slip my hand out of there. Tie this guy. And a double knot. And you can also wrap this around a couple of times to make it really secure too. And basically what we've done is just create the exact same shape of a bundle that we did when we were using the pom-pom maker. This can be a little bit more wonky, and it probably will take more trimming at the end because it's not as precise as the pom-pom maker, but it is a really good alternative if you don't have one. So I just realized that I've left this little end quite short. So just make sure that you keep these separate once you go to shape and trim this pom-pom so that it doesn't accidentally get trimmed along with these. So I usually hold it off to the side. This is also helpful when you have much sharper needles, but you're gonna cut into this bundle through each loop. Some of them will probably be tucked inside a little bit. Okay. So like I said, this is a little bit wonkier. It's more of an oval shape. But if you have your sharp scissors, go ahead, trim this furry beast into the proper shape of a pom-pom. And then you will just follow the same process where you use the two tail ends that you made sure not to cut, and you're gonna thread those in and tie it onto the top of your hat the same way we did with the pom-pom that we made using the maker. So I hope that's a fun new trick for you guys. I know there's a lot of other ways of making pom-poms out there with pieces of cardboard. You can also, instead of using your fingers, use a small book or something that's the size that you want your pom-pom to be, but I find this pretty easy in a pinch if you don't have any other materials around. So that now completes the tutorial for the peace hat. I hope you guys had so much fun during this knit along, and like I said, this hat pattern is a great base for creating lots of fun different kinds of hats, so hopefully you will have a great time with it and be able to use it in the future as well. Thank you so much for knitting along with me, and please make sure to tag all of your projects with hashtag #PeaceHatKal and also hashtag #HatNotHate. If you've made a bunch of these, or if you have any other blue hats that you've knit or crocheted, feel free to send those to Lion Brand Yarn. I will drop the address into the blog post for this third session as well, because they're collecting as many hats as they can to donate to a local New York school for all the kids to wear on October 1st, which is World Anti-Bullying Day. And also wear these yourselves, give them to your kids and your friends and family members so that they can wear these not only on October 1st, but throughout the month of October to show solidarity and help prevent bullying and create a conversation around it. So thanks again for participating, and I'll see you guys on social media.